Keine Ahnung, theoretisch ein bisschen, ne? Voll Now it's my
I wanted to fly. Ja, das ist
doch, das hat auch angenommen. Aber vorsichtig funktioniert die ganze Zeit. Das Feld halt immer switch back to the
all the things.
I know what you mean.
Sorry?
Haben wir dann auch erledigt?
Habe ich gesehen. Ja, ich hab's mir noch nicht angeguckt, weil auf dem Handy hat die Arbeit
Wait, give me 2 seconds. Coffee? Oh yeah, I never got a coffee.
Das heißt, wenn es auf MySQL wird, wird es immer auf das heißt, man muss quasi auschecken, wie läuft es, und dann haben wir noch irgendwie extreme Stress und zudem möchte ich halt noch ein paar schöne Sachen fixen. Zum Beispiel diese OpenNode-Tabelle, kein Authority, so also quasi OpenNode ohne
Das war jetzt halt dann jetzt quasi aber das war
Yes. Ich habe gerade Preside ich habe ein Projekt gemacht. Ja. Vorne nennt man ja nochmal
Ja.
Genau zum Beispiel.
Ja, klar.
Make sure. You can hear things? You can hear generally, or yeah? A delay. You can't hear me, but you can hear. Yeah, it's delayed. Should be delayed.
Testing 1 2 1 2 1 2. Keep talking. Yep, testing 1 2 1 2. Bit of a delay. So, yeah, testing 1 2 1 2. Yep.
Genau.
So if people want to have a Wi-Fi access, though, if you use this Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi name is also the password, so high security, works perfectly here. Yes.
Yeah. I'll send like a link so it's like. Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Just you never know when you start recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab some. Why haven't I took coffee? No, I just got. Grab some water. Thank you. I did make one.
Right, let me just grab.
But, it's alright. No. Yeah. Is Alex even in here? Alex. Oh yeah. At the back. Is Michi coming? Or is he not? Whoa, you got sugar in there?
Yep.
Thanks.
Heckling, yeah.
Cool, we're recording? Boom. Welcome everybody to PresideCon 2018. Super stoked to have a full room. It's really, really awesome. Yes, so today we are live streaming for the first time, so when you heckle me, the whole world will see and hear. You don't need to go and visit that, but it's on YouTube, and I'm telling people that are watching it, so that's completely pointless. Okay, I'm going to jump straight in and talk a little bit about what open source means to me personally. So open source, a love story of pain, suffering, and endless turmoil. I was searching for this picture, actually. Incidentally, I just go into Unsplash. I put in turmoil, and I got reams and reams of pictures of people slightly younger than myself in very nice muted shades, looking like this. Although that was completely inappropriate. Okay, but actually, this is when I think about open source. This is what I think about. Beautiful. Whoa, sorry. Beautiful. Everything is perfect, right? Oh, damn it. I missed my notes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. So yes. Hands up who thinks of open source like this. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Versus this. Also me. Right. Okay, but what hey?
Sorry.
It's okay. For me, open source really is this. Like, it's for all the hell that is open source, it's an awesome thing. And it's really important to remember that, I think. So I've just got a little list of the things that open source means to me. So open source, first and foremost to me, and disclaimer on this is my own personal views, and I appreciate that other political views exist, and I have no problem with them. But first and foremost, open source is sticking it to the man, to the fat cat. And it's quite an immature thing to come out with, right? But actually I think it's really important. Open source is independent and free from the fat cat, right? It means we can undermine the fat cat when he's being too greedy. When I say he, is obviously genderless, the man, right? We can say that the fat cat is being too greedy. They're doing things with software. They're keeping it all for themselves and not giving anything back. People around the world say, no, we're going to do this. This is open source. There you go. This person has been cheating you all. Have this for free. And it keeps it real, right? Because there's nothing wrong with making money. And we all here, I'm sure, need to make money to survive. But open source sticks it to the man by keeping that balance of don't take too much. And it also evades the man. We've several instances recently of the fat cat going, hey, open source, I'm going to have you. And open source just steps to the side and says, no, you're not, I'm forked. And I carry on, right? We have Lucy, we have MariaDB and LibreOffice, right? It's kind of like VB.net and Windows 3.1. Anyone remember the application where it's just a pop-up window with a button, click to close? Like you hover a mouse over event, the window moves away. That, for me, is open source in its relationship to those that try to shut it down. Sticking it to the man. Now, this is really dramatic. And I really did say that open source is a beacon of hope. It kind of related in the last few years, particularly. I'm not going to go there at all. Things have sometimes felt a little dark, right? And open source for me, in terms of what I can do and give back to my communities, open source is a beacon of hope against a lot of that darkness. In the same way that some greedy fat cats may try and take too much from open source or shut it down, governments do the same thing. We have the open internet, and we have a massive privilege in presumably all the countries that we here live in where we can access the open internet without restriction. But it's not always the case, right? But still, open source evades that, and we get around it, and we work together across cultures, across borders. It's not a massive story, but I was on Stack Overflow, I think, and someone's answer was particularly a good contribution. It was open source software in itself, this answer. Turns out it was whoever it was, and I wanted to donate some money to this guy. He's like, well, sorry, I'm from Iran. You literally cannot do that. Like, I can't give him money. He says, but go and donate to a good cause you want instead. And that's like, wow. That's open source. There are people, the dark times, and I will go, no, I won't touch on it again. They will tell us, the Iranians, these are the bad people, right? I mean, we all know that they're not. People are people. And open source always is, no, we have some code, we have an author of that code, doesn't need to go any further, and they share that. It's a beacon of hope. It's an astonishing achievement. I struggled to find the right photograph, but I really like this photograph. I kind of imagine that these three are all Nobel Prize winners, and actually now their achievement is getting up and walking down the street, and we all celebrate these people. But open source is a little bit more like this, right? It's really hard work. It's not necessarily glamorous a lot of the time until a big corporation gives it a load of money, and then it's all very nice. But it's what really matters. And the things that are achieved in open source I find absolutely astounding. The fact that this is live streaming on a Linux operating system on OBS, which is all open source. We have digital audio workstations, which are incredibly complicated. One guy, particularly, who authors Ardor, massive sacrifice to himself. This is incredible. We have LibreOffice, an entire office suite. I mean, I haven't printed something in 10 years. I managed to do this, and I missed out my own name. I forgot to print myself, but still, you know, I connected to a printer on Linux on an open source Wi-Fi printer driver. All of these things are incredible, and way beyond that. I had a big long list, and then the screen share doesn't allow me to see my notes, but Git, incredible. Yeah, and it's inspiring. In the old days of code, in the kind of original, in the early days of coding, right? Punch cards, you punch in your program, you submit it to the operator who has to run it through the machine, and you've got a day to wait before you see if you had a bug, right? And people would sit down and read other people's code. We don't do that so much anymore because, like, while something's reloading, maybe is about as much time as we get, and then we go on TweetDeck. But open source can inspire us. If we wish to study, and we do study, we can just go on and actually look at the Linux kernel and say, okay, we might despair if we do that. But we can look at, we can go ahead and see how Android works in some way if we want, and we can read that. It's an inspiration and an education. Okay, open source is not perfect. And I think it's really, for me, it's really important never to expect it to be, or to expect it necessarily to compete. I mean, think about some of the things that are not perfect. There are people involved, and people are people. Many open source communities run, and then a few personalities, shall we say, come in and can really make it very challenging. Open source projects get dropped. Support for them, you might be using them, you're like, oh, this is brilliant. I've got this little bug fix, and you submit it, and then 2 years go by and no one responds. So open source is slow. Any other imperfections with open source? I think that's it, really. There are buggies. Funding can be difficult. People can run out of money. Maintaining a community is really hard. And I think one of the things in open source that money really helps with, where money is really put to good use, is gathering a diverse mix of people to help an open source project run. For developers, it's really easy to start an open source project, right? And it's kind of fun. You just do some code and you put it up there. But if it's to kind of grow and have longevity, you soon become kind of overwhelmed with managing people, organizing conferences. No one wants to do that. And certainly they don't want to stand up in front of everybody and talk. And yes, that's not perfect. And to be fair, it's not perfect in the corporate world either. Or I know in our company we have the same struggles, but at least we have clients coming in and paying for it, so we can. It's much easier to keep going. Open source is really hard work. I'm very self-conscious, and doing the large part of my work in the open is quite emotionally challenging, right? Maybe in your company you do some work, it might get code reviewed by someone, and to be fair, I'm sure no one's sat at home like going through the Preside code and going, well, that's no good, that's no good. But in my mind, they are, right? And when you work in open source, maybe they are. When you work in open source, that's every commit you make, you're like, oh God, I hope, I hope no one's criticizing me all the time. And that's hard work. Some people that might not affect. But it's also a challenge, right? And it kind of inspires us to do our best and to make what we do as good as possible. There's sort of talk by a lady who she worked in the UK government, and they didn't need to do anything open source, and the work they did that was open source wasn't necessarily intended to be used, but they had a culture of working in the open, so everything they did, all the government software they were writing was on GitHub, for that very reason, to say, hey, we work in the open, and we are answerable to everybody, and that keeps our own standards high, and, well, we're the government, so that's how it should be. So open source is a privilege to defend. I touched on it earlier. There are people in the world that would like to close down open source projects. They're not necessarily, evil villains. They might just, be answering to their shareholders. But I'm pretty sure Steve Ballmer said Linux is a cancer, right? That's pretty insane. And thankfully, Microsoft has turned that around and is now contributing. But we shouldn't take it for granted that, it will always be there. Microsoft has just bought GitHub. It's probably a good thing. But one of the early things I mentioned that I think is massively important for open source is its independence, right? The fact that we can, as people, just do things together, thanks to the internet, without the kind of murky waters of shareholders, right? And it's irrepressible. It just keeps happening. It keeps coming. So yes, Microsoft has bought GitHub, probably a good thing in the long term, right? Possibly not. But then GitLab has already happened. I mean, GitHub was a revolution, right, for open source. Anyone remember before anybody? Okay, hands up who's had a pull request or a bug or whatever, a bug listened to or a pull request reviewed or accepted on GitHub. Okay. Keep hands up if anybody has contributed to open source with patches before GitHub. Okay, yeah, some. I never did. It was really hard, right? And GitHub, I think, is a really great example of money and open source, the right balance, right? They give to the open source community. They make money. I don't know how much money they were making, but they've just sold for a small sum, I'm mentioning. And they really opened it up. And they answered all those things that are really hard work, like getting community, allowing people across the world to contribute by formalizing the process to do that, right? Forks, pull requests. And they answer some of the difficulties as well with personalities, right? So contributing before GitHub might have been an email and a patch. And that email is going to the really grumpy developer who's tired of reading through awful patches and is just going to shout at you. That still might happen on GitHub, but it's much more easier to deal with from the maintainer's point of view and easier to contribute to, and that's awesome. So that happened, but open source carries on. There are people saying, okay, I think maybe GitHub, you're now being, it's a bit worrying that we've got like this one source, right? So now we have GitLab, and you can go to GitLab and pay the money to host it, or you can host your own GitLab. Like in minutes, you can spin up a Docker container of GitLab, and that's doing even more than GitHub, and all the same patterns. So this kind of murkiness of Microsoft buying GitHub isn't necessarily, it's probably a good thing, but even if that turns bad, open source is irrepressible. It keeps going. We'll pick up GitLab. It's fine. We'll move. No problem. But it's a privilege to defend. We mustn't take it for granted. We must keep in mind and kind of seek out where people are taking away that privilege from us. So Oracle bought Sun, right? And I think, is it the European Commission? I'm not sure. As part of that purchase said, okay, you've got to keep all these open source things open source. But even then, almost immediately, they closed sourced the unit tests for MySQL. Right? Why did they do that? We just have to be aware of those little things. Sure, it's still open source. It's probably okay. It's probably a good thing. They're funding it. That's great. But be aware of it and make choices based on that. Don't take it for granted. Okay. And then finally, so open source is a worthwhile ongoing struggle. So these are things that I try to remind myself to do. Making sacrifices of small conveniences to use and help promote open source. I use a Linux desktop. It's not perfect. Sometimes I have to log in twice. But I make that choice. I don't use another one because I can contribute back. When I find bugs, I raise them with the maintainers with as much information as I can. Volunteer your awesome people or replace people with other skills you have to help organize a conference, manage a user group, provide tutorials, documentation, raise bugs, answer questions in the community, provide code, right? Get involved. And in every small way. But I would suggest that the non-code things are the things that really add massive value to projects whose maintainers are all code people and don't have those skills, because when you get the other skills in, it's really uplifting. Give constructive and useful feedback to open source projects, and don't be an ass about it, right? Keep using, recognizing, and giving thanks to the open source software that you use. And let's run out of space. I can probably scroll. Okay, it was the last point. So the last point is to hide Google Hangouts. Don't expect more than you're willing to give, but recognize and be thankful for the fact that you're almost certainly going to get way, way more than you're going to give, right? We get so much from open source software that we just take for granted. So just, yes, keep expectations. And I suppose that's really good to keep in mind when you're giving feedback as well, right? And I'm sure everybody here are good citizens and don't berate people for something they're giving you for free, right? Okay, those are my thoughts on open source. So, the About Me slide. So, I'm Dominic Watson. I'm the CTO at the Pixelate Group, lead developer of Preside. I'm a father and I'm a husband. Does always surprise me. Yeah. Ex-musical theatre actor, and you can find me on Twitter at Dom_Watson. And there's a picture of my kids. Aren't they awesome? Taken by my awesome wedding photographer wife, whose website is on Preside, sharongibson.co.uk. Okay. So, we're at PresideCon. Let's talk about Preside. Preside is a growing competitor for mid to large scale commercial content and data platforms, open sourced. We work openly and with integrity to create a platform for and with our community. That's who I think we are as Preside. Our mission is to build an out-of-box web application foundation that does as much of the laborious, hard, and overlooked work for you, accelerating teams as they focus on unique requirements. Pretty common goal for a lot of open software, right? Platforms do a lot of the hard work for you. I think we do a pretty good job of it and allow you to fill the gaps where it doesn't do. And our mission is also to build a community and platform that leads by example, that is a joy to use, a joy to work with, and a joy to participate in. Our vision for the future is Preside solving complex needs for a wide variety of industries and communities, and a well-known name founded on openness and excellence. Okay. So I imagine most people here, if not all, know a bit about Preside, but I'm just going to do a super concise Preside history that actually surprised me a little. So it was around 5 years ago that Preside was still closed source. At Pixelate, it was very much a CMS with Pixelate clients, and it had some really awesome concepts, but it was time really for a rebuild. The concepts were great, but it was very difficult to start using any kind of MVC frameworks with it and have consistent approaches. So back then I hit the delete button, and Alex, the CEO of Pixelate, was like, "Hey, we're going to go open source. This is what we're going to do." His reasons may be a little bit different from my own reasons for supporting open source, although shared as well. But that was the decision. So that was about 5 years ago, and I remember. So we started from scratch. It sits on the Coldbox platform, and we presented it at CF Camp. I think it was about 3 months of development in. 5 years ago seems about right, and we were presenting it. We would talk about it afterwards. It had some great, cool concepts, and we'd be talking about it. Alex is really to people, it's 80% done. Well, 80%, yeah, something that's right, yeah. And then soon after that, he much to my protest, kind of pushed. Okay, we're getting clients on this now. It's like, oh, okay. My point there being is that I felt it was too early, and there was loads missing, and then there's still things missing, but those clients didn't mind. It worked. It's still happy, you know. It's a really great combination of those skills, right? I'm a developer, but I am terrible at marketing, and I will always shy away from going, yeah, let's do this. And sometimes you need those skills of those people to push you. So that was back then. Yeah, so within 6 months, we were starting developing applications for clients on it. And it also pushes you to finish a lot of things. And then this is what really surprised me. It was actually May 2015 that 10.0 was released, which was the first time that Preside was on GitHub. I can't believe it's only 3.5 years ago. It seems like a very long time ago. But that was released, and it looked and worked very much like it does now. A lot of the key features were there. We had the dev console, the data manager, site tree, the CMSE bits, but also the more platform-oriented pieces. And then since then, we've been making minor releases. So I put minor in quotes because some of them have been quite a big deal. So 10.9 took over a year to develop and then release. Kind of kept pushing back and like, oh, let's put that feature in. Oh, okay, yeah. We'll release it finally. And those minor releases over those 10 points have been, a lot of it has been filling in those pieces that we knew weren't there to start with. And it feels like now at 10.10, we're pretty much, we're never going to be feature complete, right? There's always another feature. But those kind of vital things that we kind of feel that needed to be there, we feel are there. There are more vital things that people says, how can't you have that? We can't do anything without that, even though they do. But also in those minor releases have been little injections of things that we might not have thought about at the beginning that we need in a CMS. The rules engine, the email center, and on the email center, so the email center, for those who don't know, is allows you to build custom newsletters and send them out, right? I remember saying we should never, ever, ever build that, right? Pixelate, don't build it. It's way too difficult. There's because you'll undersell it. You'll sell it for like a week's work, and it's, you've got to make sure what happens, make sure the email doesn't get sent twice, right? I don't know how many of anybody's seen like an email newsletter sending out tool and it having loads of problems. Like, don't do it, and then. Somebody told me in sales, oh yeah, we've sold like a custom newsletter tool. Okay, it's got to go live. It's like, oh, okay, and we've got a mid-level developer pegged down to do it. I was like, okay, so let's do this properly. And so the email center was born. So there are little things that we hadn't necessarily planned that had come in, and now that we have them, we're like, oh yeah. This is, why didn't we have this? This is awesome. And so we're now at 10.10. And 10.10 was released Monday, 2 days ago, just in time, coincidentally. So what's new? We are finally caught up with Coldbox. Hurrah! So we're on Coldbox 5.2. The original 10.0 was supposed to be on Coldbox 4, and Lucy 5, but both Coldbox and Lucy 5, they were delayed, and we'll go out on Coldbox 3, and Coldbox 4 I think came out a year later, and it took us, I guess, 2.5 years. 10.9 is on Coldbox 4, and as soon as we did that, they released Coldbox 5. They released Coldbox 5 just before we released 10.9, but it was too short of a window to test it. So we're now on Coldbox 5.2. Which means we can keep up to date with the work they're doing. We can contribute back to Coldbox more. And hands up, that's something I haven't done as much as we could have done. And we have contributed bug fixes, but we can do more. Anyway, that's Coldbox upgrade. The email center has had a heap of enhancements, some new features, and an improved user experience. We have now record cloning. One of those things is that, well, you can't live without being able to clone a record. We could, but now that we have it, it's pretty awesome. The task manager, which again was actually one of those things that we didn't think it wasn't like a necessity, but the fact that we have it in there is really cool. There was a few issues with it, and we rewrote the engine. Engine is a glorified term. We rewrote the code that makes it work. There's now a health check framework, which is a nice little thing, but it's pretty cool. I'll show you that in a second. And we have admin login providers, which actually I don't know how we live without. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through the email center. For those of you who are familiar with what it looked like, you'll see some changes. For those that are new to it, I won't spend too much time talking about it, but the grid is now more useful. So when you're seeing all your custom email newsletters and so on, we've got some color. And this is all doable in Preside anyway. You can do custom renderers in different contexts. So you can say, well, I've got this sending method field. I'm going to render it like this. If I render it in a form, I'm going to render it like this. If I'm going to render it in an admin data table. But we've done that. So we've got color-coded schedules. And it's a bit light to see on here, but with some extra information. So we've kind of made the grid more useful. So you can see when is it next scheduled to send, if it's a scheduled email. If it's manual, has it been sent? If so, how many people has it been sent to? Okay, yeah. So then if we go into an email, there are some new things. So we've got a cloning email, and that's using the cloning system. So there's a core data level cloning framework, again, a glorious term, but some methodologies for cloning, and then we can hook into that very easily. So we do that with the email. We now have send test email, which we didn't have before. One of those things I would have thought, well, we can't live without that. We could, but it's much nicer now that we have it. What it will do, let me get to this. So then we also have being able to preview an email in the context of a recipient that it might go to. For those that are unfamiliar with the email center in Preside, there's a concept for developers of recipient types. So you could make an email that's going to go out to your users, your kind of public users, or you could have an email that's going out to admin users. And depending on the email that you've written that you're drafting, let's say it's going to an admin user, when we click on this preview recipient, it's going to give you the list of admin users if it was an admin email, or the web users if it's a web email. You click on that and the preview changes as if you were this user. Now that's really cool, and then really takes advantage of the power of the email center, which, yes, you can use MailChimp or whatever it is for mass email sending, but the customization is quite limited. Here we're able to do a lot more. We can use the rules engine to say, well, if this customer has booked on this event that I'm promoting at the bottom of this email, say, thanks for booking. Oh, by the way, you should go over here and do something else. Because I know that this individual person, hasn't done that. You definitely can't do that in MailChimp. And now you can preview that live, which is really cool. So one of our clients uses that really heavily. They send out an email, and they used to do it in, I think, 20 to 30 separate email templates. They now do it in 2 or 3. And they just say, well, if the user's in this region, show them this little piece of content. Most of the emails are the same, but and they'll do different things. And we can now preview. Yeah, so when the test email, you click on test email, the email that you're going to, address that you're going to send it to will default to the email address of the user that's logged into the admin. But of course you can change it and you can add multiple. And then you can choose the preview recipient. So again, so you've got your 20,000 members of your website. You can choose one of those and the email is going to render for that user, but it's going to send to your test email address. And the nice thing about that is that it won't count towards the stats that are logged in here. A little change to the edit view. Again, this is for those that already know it, but it's been really simplified. There were loads of settings in here, that's now not. The edit view is just about the content. And now all of those settings have just moved to the settings tab. Before they were kind of in a couple of places, but there were quite a few settings in there, but we've kind of hidden them away so that if you're just editing the email, you don't have to care about that all the time. Whoops. And we now have a stats tab. Another one of those things is like, well, how can you not have that? It's like, well, you lived without it, and it was delivered in 2 weeks, which is why you didn't have it before. So we already had this overview up here of the emails that are sent out, and these are real stats from a client. But it was always in the last 90 days. So now it's for all time. The graph will automatically, if it's for all time, will just kind of condense it to the last stat that it has from the first stat that it has, so it doesn't kind of go flat. And yeah, and you can filter that on date, so that's really cool. And depending on who you're sending emails with, might mean that those stats aren't as accurate as they could be, for example. So we send through Mailgun or Mailjet, and they have an API so that when somebody gets the email delivered, we get a notification and we can mark it and they count towards the stats. If you're just sending it out plain SMTP without anything that's going to notify you back, you're not going to know that it was delivered really until somebody opens it and the little image pixel tracks, and then you'll see it. Or if somebody clicks on it, clicks a link on there and you have click tracking, then it will definitely come up as a click and it will mark it as opened and delivered. But those stats might not be as accurate as they can be, but you can absolutely use other services to report that. And finally, we have the send log, and that's been there for a while. We can now export that, and you can export all the events chronologically for your email template and across all email templates, which, depending on how much email you're sending, could be a pretty big deal. So that's the email center changes. Record cloning, so I mentioned it before, there's a cloning system. You can mark up your objects to say, okay, clone these fields only, and so on. But we've implemented that, as we've seen before, in the email center, but also in the site tree, so you can clone a page. And we've used some of the customization to say, well, okay, well, when you're cloning a page, you can clone it into a separate site. Preside, you can have multiple sites. Select the parent page that it's going to live underneath. Give it a new page title. You have to have a new title and a new slug. And you can also choose to include child pages and bring those over when you clone it as well. And whether or not to save it as a new draft. So that's really useful. Oh, didn't want to do that, did I? There we go. Good. You can also clone entire sites. Like that. So I've just gone into a site, hit clone site, change the name. It would need a unique combination of domain and URL path, but that's it. It's going to clone all of the pages in the site that you're cloning. And just a tiny hint on that, in terms of how that works. So let's say we have an object here, a really simple one. It doesn't need to be marked up with anything about cloning. So we'll notice that the label there has a unique index on it. So by default, if you're using this in the data manager, for example, and you get cloning for free in there, you say, I'm going to clone this record. It's going to give you a form with the description and the image pre-filled to the record that you were choosing, but the label will be blank because it's got a unique indexes, and we know that, okay, it's absolutely pointless cloning that field. And I just have a link here to the documentation. Seb is going to do a talk a little later on about customization in the data manager, And you can really customize how this cloning works. You can supply a specific form just for cloning, so you can really tweak what that form's going to look like. You can do post-processing. So we obviously, with the email center, we do that. We've got an event system where if we clone an event, it's like, yeah, it's not one record. It's like whole loads of records. And you can have one-to-many relationships that by default are not cloned. But you can choose them to be cloned, and it will go ahead and clone all the related records, which is pretty cool. Yeah, that's enough on record cloning. The task manager rewrite is pretty cool. So we had a few issues with that. So for those that don't know, the task manager is kind of like loosely scheduled tasks, but you can define them in application code in ColdBox handlers. You can see a live log of them if you make use of the logger that gets passed to your handler, and they're really very cool. Sometimes they have performance issues. One issue that we had was the way that was implemented is that we had a loosely scheduled task that ran every 30 seconds that pings an endpoint that says, do I have any Preside tasks to run? And an issue that is apparently a feature, not a bug, in Lucy is that if that task fails a number of times, Lucy will just stop running it, which then is a real pain because your task stopped running. So we've rewritten it. So what we now have, what we're looking at here is looking at the JVM and looking at the threads that are running. And we can see a number of threads. But a couple, in terms of scheduled tasks, you can see. So we've got a thread called Preside Heartbeat Scheduled Tasks. And that is basically a background thread that will always run for the life of your Preside application. And every second, it's going to check to see, do I have any tasks to run? And the cool thing about that is before, the granularity of time that you could use for your scheduled tasks was 30 seconds in theory, but in reality at 1 minute. You can now have a task that's going to run every 2 seconds if you really want. Yeah. And then the other one here is when one of those tasks runs, it runs in its own task, but you actually get the name of the task in the thread. So before it used to just say CF thread, CF thread, CF thread, CF thread, and if for whatever reason you were debugging an issue with your server and it could have been a task that was a problem, all you'll see was that in the thread dump that it was this thread. But now you get a really good picture of what's going on. You'll notice basically we took this technique and applied it to a whole load of other things. So an email center enhancement is that you can now have multiple threads. If you're sending out 100,000 emails, you can have multiple threads processing that queue. And they're just sat there going, do nothing for 5 seconds. What's in the queue? What's in the queue? We have ad hoc tasks that we had in 10.9, which means you could say, do this in 10 seconds. And this is repeatedly checking to see, do I have anything to do? And we have health checks, which I will show you shortly. And a nice thing about this approach rewrite, and this is going to be difficult to see, this is another little thing in 10.10. There's a system output. If you do like $system output within a service, it'll add some, it'll say Preside system output and the timestamp. Just so this will come out, if you're running Tomcat, this will be in your Catalina.outlogs. Or this is actually just command box with starting up a server and doing -- console. So these logs come out here. So when we do a reload, the first thing we see is that Preside is attempting to do a graceful application shutdown. Right? It's attempting to shut down the thread, the Preside service health check is Zabbix. And it's got much softer ways of shutting down these background threads, so that if you've got these scheduled tasks running and you want to interrupt them, that task can say, am I interrupted? If it's doing a big old loop, on each loop you can say, if I'm interrupted, I'll stop now. Okay, fine. And I'll clean up after myself. Whereas before it was like, you're dead. So you can see that all of those threads are now gracefully shutting down. That's complete, and we're starting up again. Lovely. Makes me happy. So health checks. So this is a really nice feature. So the concept is Elasticsearch is a good example, right? You might have an Elasticsearch service. From time to time that goes down for some reason. In your config CFC, your ColdBox config, We have settings.healthCheck services, and then you can add ones in there. And you can say, okay, I'm going to have an Elasticsearch health check, and that's going to check it every 10 seconds. I then create a callbox handler at handlers health check Elasticsearch, and it has to implement a private Boolean check function. That's it. And so that could be a working example. It's just going to return ping, assuming that Elasticsearch service.ping method is going to either return any true or a number. If an error should happen there, the health check system is going to say, okay, you're down, right? Or if it returns false, you're down. And then in your code, in your handlers and your views, you can just say, is up Elasticsearch. Cool. Otherwise, not so cool. And the really cool thing about that, an example we have a geolocation extension, which is really cool. It does like an IP lookup. And tells you where you're from, right? It does cache it, but if it's the first time you've done it, it's going to do this live lookup. If that service goes down, basically your request is going to hang, right? Whereas with this, the way this works is it's doing it never, when you say is up, it's never doing a live check. It's literally going, well, what does this service think from the last time it ran this in a background thread? Does that make sense? So really nice. It's really simple, but a cool feature that we should make more use of. So in the geolocation example, it should go, well, if you're up, let's get that information. Otherwise, don't. And don't crash the user and crash your server because this external services are down. And we saw that. Let's quickly go back. Whoops. Quickly go back. So for each health check that you define, Preside spins up a dedicated thread that's sleeping for your interval that you define, doing a check, sleeping, doing a check. Admin login providers, really simple. A couple of things. So here's an example. This particular example lets me, when I'm developing locally, hit a button to log in as me. So an admin login provider is two things. It's a viewlet to render something in that screen, like a button or a form. And that gets given the position in an array of login providers. So you can see here that we've got the standard Preside login screen. And what the renderer for that now does, it says, well, if my position is not 1, render a little bootstrap collapsed, start collapsed, and then fold over. And my other renderer renders a button that goes to a callbox handler that does this. Does some other stuff, and we have this helper that says, do admin SSO login. So presumably if it was like a Google OAuth something, you've gone on, you've got the identity of the person. You can then say, well, login ID is probably the person's email address. And then user data is whatever data I've got. It'll log them into the admin and update any information in the database against that person. And do all the other admin login things that it needs to do, like remember the page you were trying to go to. So that's pretty cool. So we've started doing SAML single sign-ons for people in their admin systems, like with Azure and so on, which is really fun. Okay. Very briefly, where are we headed? I quite like this picture because it's a collaboration. Later on, we're going to do a lean coffee session where we will have some groups of discussions about, there's no agenda, right? So it's whatever you want to talk about. Could just be questions if you're new or want to know answers to something, but it could also be, okay, well, here's what it doesn't do that I really, really wanted to do. In general, however, the last few minor releases have really been focused on things that aren't really related to CMS. And I didn't mention that actually when we first released it was Preside CMS, and 10.9 we took all that branding away, even though for a long time it wasn't just a CMS. But a lot of the features have been focused on the admin and being able to write admin applications. And as a business, we're starting to do more and more of that type of work for our clients. And Preside has definitely been heading down there. So for the next major release, which will be 11, our current thinking is it will be broken up a little bit, so we'll do a bit of gardening. We'll kind of separate out the CMS part, but still have it as a core bundle. You'll still be able to say, well, install Preside CMS, and you will have everything, but you will also be able to install it with none of that code there. You can already run Preside and not use any of the CMS, but it's kind of still there. So you want to do that, and we want to give a bit more focus onto some of those CMS things, like the editor. We would love to do better than Gutenberg. For those who don't know, it's a new WordPress editor that's pretty cool, actually. But we can do better in Preside than that and really improve the editing experience in the CMS. As well as do whole loads of other things that we've promised for years, like workflow engines and all the rest of it. But there is no defined roadmap, and I kind of think that's a good thing. We've always kind of committed to a roadmap that we can never deliver because a client comes in and says, oh, well, let's do this instead, and that's the way it is. It's open source. It's not perfect. But the point is, it can also go wherever you want it to go. If you're using Preside, really push for features, code extensions, and we can run with that. Cool. That's it. Thanks for listening. So today we've got a bunch of talks. Super excited about some people talking for the first time, other people maybe talking for the second time, and Mishi's talking. And I really would love to need to say a huge thank you to Mishi, without whom I don't think this would ever have happened. It's now the third time, and having his support. And going back to that open source piece, right? That mixture of personalities that kind of allow it to go beyond where it can go with just like introverted personalities, right? You have somebody else that can do something else, that knows how to run an event and goes, I'm going to back you guys and I'm going to push it, and really appreciate it. So, cool, that's it. Thank you. We're going to have probably 10 minutes break, grab a drink, and we'll make sure we're set up, and then we'll kick off again.
Great one.
Yeah.
Nice. Go that way. Yeah. It's like a double that tape. So.
Good job.
If anybody is listening on the stream, it's going to go down.